All righty. Good evening, guys. Benjamin Hadfield. I'll be your instructor this evening for Enriched Air Nitrox. My qualification to teach this: I'm a master instructor with SSI, an Enriched Air Nitrox instructor with SSI, as well as an extended range nitrox diving instructor, which means I can teach level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 100 nitrox as well. I'm just kidding. There's not actually a level 100, but there is up to 100%. So I can teach how to use nitrox or oxygen up to 100%. As my qualification teaches. As always, as we go through this, just make sure you're thinking about what that dive journey looks like to you. And here's a kind of a few fun things that you can take from me, and I'd be happy to teach you. We've got all kinds of fun things and places that you'll find nitrox to be particularly beneficial. Solo diving, absolutely. Dry suit and ice diving, not so much. It depends on the dry suit dive, though. Really, when you start talking cold water, though, you want to make sure if you're diving nitrox, you want to make sure you're diving a separate bottle for your dry suit, though. Independent diving, wreck diving, advanced wreck diving, search and recovery could be a benefit as well. Altitude, we've got an altitude class on Monday, which is so definitely some benefits there as well. Let's see, night limited viz, deep definitely is a good place to have that. Let's see, the ecology is whatever. Full face mask, stress and rescue. There's a lot of reasons to dive nitrox as well. And again, as we go through these, you'll find pictures of me in various places. I like to make it personal. Suggested classes as we kind of go through this. My suggested classes for this for you guys as new divers, always going to be night limited viz, deep dive, and stress and rescue with React Right. Once you become a nitrox diver, also adding the O2 provider on that is never a bad idea either. So just be aware that we're always looking for what's the next better thing to do. Night limited visibility, deep diving are amazing classes, and that's night is when you get the cool stuff. Deep diving, there's cool stuff beyond the 60-foot mark, and stress and rescue, so you can be able to handle it better. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. What is the magical thing known as nitrox? Who remembers from the homework? Troy, what is nitrox?
That's why we're here for. Heavier dense oxygen, I guess. I don't know.
Patrick, did you read the homework?
Negative. I did not know that. I would see that part. Yep.
No worries.
Sorry about that. But if I were to take a stab at it, it is it's similar to a breathing gas, but with a higher concentration of oxygen in it and a lower percentage of nitrogen.
Okay, so yeah, nitrox is any blend of gas that is composed primarily of oxygen and nitrogen. So technically, what we're breathing right now is nitrox, right? Because it's 79% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. But for the purposes of diving, we consider nitrox to be any blend of air and oxygen that is more than 21% oxygen, less than 78% nitrogen, if you will. But with that two blends, if you add anything else in, then it becomes a different term. And the most common one being trimix or heliotrox. So we're going to talk with nitrox. So any blend that combines nitrogen and oxygen in higher percentage than 21% oxygen. So that's our what we're kind of looking at. And as we look at that, we've got levels of nitrox that we're going to deal with. Level 1 is going to be up to 32% nitrox. Level 2 is 36%, or up to 40% nitrox. And so we're going to be certifying you guys through 40% nitrox. Now, a couple housekeeping tips. Make sure you have called the shop and ordered the class. If you haven't done that, we need to make sure we do that as soon as possible, as well as once you get that on your profile, if you would open it up and go through. I believe that there are 5 chapters, Aaron, or 6. I'm trying to remember.
It shows 54 pages for me. I just called the shop less than a couple hours ago to get access to it. So I was like, oh, okay.
No worries. So
there's four sections, and there's not a lot in the homework. It should take you an hour to get through it all. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
I
that's
couldn't remember if there was
reasonable.
4 or 5 sections in nitrox as we went kind of through this process. So it's not very difficult. The final exam is online, makes your life nice and easier. There is also a final exam for 32% and 40%. So just be aware of that. And then there is a great appendix session. Make sure you're going through that because it'll cover things like partial pressure, equivalent air depths, actual depths from nitrox, as well as mods consuming combined nitrox tables, the equivalent tables, and a few things like that. They're definitely to your advantage as well, but also give you some resources to be able to find that. So as we go through that this course, what are some of the advantage, guys, of using nitrox?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just hear you can stay down longer, and it's healthier for us older people.
Absolutely. Longer bottom times. And that's a big deal, right? We want to make sure we're staying down. As we looked at it, for example, if we went on an air dive to 60 feet, our maximum bottom time, according to the SSI tables, is 50 minutes, 50, right? So if we use 36% nitrox, the SSI tables will tell you your maximum bottom time increases to 130 minutes. Is that fairly significant for you guys?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a pretty good size difference, right? Going from 50 minutes to 130 minutes. I mean, that's 2.5 times more. Now, there are a few limitations to nitrox as well. Anybody want to take a guess at what those limitations are?
I was actually thinking about that today. Does it have something to do with at certain depths, the partial pressure of oxygen being too high?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Oh, okay, cool. I was like,
Absolutely. As we go through this, it's definitely to our advantage to understand that there is a partial pressure limit to oxygen. Oxygen can become toxic at certain depths. So being aware of that is definitely to our advantage. So while some people will say that the benefits of nitrox is you can dive deeper, that's not really the case. Longer, yes. Shorter surface intervals, yes. Greater safety margin, yes. More energy after dive, yes. Deeper diving, not really. It starts reducing the overall limit, but there's a lot more benefits than negativities to it. So as we kind of look through this, we need to first understand kind of the idea of partial pressure. Partial pressure is a pretty simple thing to deal with, right? As we go through and understand partial pressure, I like to use my sponges. So I've got my little handy dandy little garden sponge here. And if this were a molecule of oxygen, we can see that the dark blue is 21% and the light blue has gotten squished over time, but we'll say that's 79% nitrogen. So that's one molecule of air, right? And at 1 atmosphere where we're sitting at right now, it takes up about this much space. But happens, there's a better sponge. That's probably a better example, right? But what ends up happening is we go down to 2 atmospheres. What ends up happening is the space between the molecules is reduced, is the most accurate way. For one of my listeners was going through that and was very kind to point that out. I've been saying it's squished together, but we'll say it as correctly as possible. All the gap area between is squished, it's compressed, and all of a sudden 2 molecules of air fit in the same space as 1 molecule of air at the surface because the space between them is squished. So it gets squished in and it takes less space. But here's the thing. In that 1 cubic inch, that 1 molecule of air that now has twice as is, we would say that in that same space, we have the equivalent of 42% or 0.42 oxygen and 158% nitrogen. Would that be fair to say at 33 feet? We haven't lost any molecules, but in that same space, now each molecule is equal to twice. And at 66 feet, it's 3 times. And at 99 feet, it's 4 times, and so on. Right? Easy enough. So as we go through this process, we realize that the partial pressure changes. So at the surface, the air we breathe is 79% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. As we get down to 2 bar or 2 ATA, it's now 158 and 0.42. Now here's the challenge with diving. Let me back up. The challenge with diving is the partial pressure of nitrogen. Okay. As we descend in the water column, we get down to 33 feet, for example. All of a sudden, our tissue compartments are on gassing nitrogen at a partial pressure of 158% or 1.58 partial pressure nitrogen, ppn2. So as we look at the challenge is as we come back up in the water column, back to the surface, that nitrogen comes out in the form of bubbles. Okay, so as it's coming out in the form of bubbles, it has to come out in some way, right? So if I go deeper, I have more nitrogen. If I have more nitrogen when it comes out in the form of more bubbles, right, guys? Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure it out. I think I do.
Okay, think of it like a bottle of Coke. If I have a bottle of Pepsi or Coke or Mountain Dew or whatever, I've got this magic bottle, right? When it's the cap is on and everything's sealed and it has a lot of pressure around it, we would say that it's at saturation. It's where it's at. Okay. As we take that cap off and we start releasing the pressure, it's becoming acclimatized to the environment around us. So the gas is coming out of solution. Okay. Those in the form of bubbles. And now, while those are carbon dioxide bubbles, what's happening in our body is pretty much the same thing. As we come up in the water column, the bubbles are coming out of solution and they have to go somewhere and it releases the pressure. Okay. So those bubbles are coming out of our tissue compartments or out of solution into our bloodstream, into our venous system, and then we breathe them off. And that's the nitrogen. Troy, does that make a little more sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. So we know that the challenge with diving is those bubbles based upon the partial pressure of what we've been dealing with. So if we have at 33 feet with just air, 158% nitrogen, that's what it is. But here's the cool thing. If I'm breathing 32% nitrox instead, that means at 33 feet, instead of breathing 158% nitrogen, I'm only breathing 136% nitrogen. And now let's liken this to cupcakes. If I eat less cupcakes, I get less fat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that pretty fair statement?
Yeah.
If I eat a ton of cupcakes, I get real fat. If I eat less cupcakes, I get less fat. Same thing with nitrogen. If I breathe less nitrogen, I absorb less nitrogen. If I absorb less nitrogen, then I have less nitrogen bubbles that will come out of my body when I start to rise in the water column. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Easy enough. So as we kind of talk about this process, it's worthwhile noting a few basic ideas of how the oxygen side of this process works. As we're standing right here, we're breathing 21% oxygen. That's normal partial pressure level of air. That's what our bodies are programmed and wired for. It's what our brain expects, right? And but what happens if we start reducing the partial pressure of oxygen? Bad things start happening. At 16% overall partial pressure of oxygen, that's the threshold for hypoxia. Exercise tolerance and mental performance begin to diminish at this level. You're not able to think clearly. You're not able to process clearly. As we start reducing that partial pressure even further, and we get down to the point of 12% air, that's the minimum partial pressure level required to maintain consciousness. Now, that's approximate. If we keep continuing this process and we get down to 10% oxygen, 90% nitrogen, that's the minimum level of partial pressure of oxygen required to sustain life. Now, interestingly enough, last night in the South, they just executed a prisoner by utilizing nitrogen. What they did is they strapped gas onto him and they started reducing the partial pressure of oxygen and increasing the partial pressure of nitrogen to the point where he lost consciousness and eventually expired and died. They executed him through a basic form of hypoxia, utilizing nitrogen. They flooded him with nitrogen to the point the partial pressure of oxygen went down and down and down, and finally he died. So if you have something you want to write down on your final exam, 0.12 normal air, 0.10 you die. Simple enough.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we move up the chain and we start going down in the water column, and that partial pressure of oxygen starts to increase, here's where it gets interesting. 1.1, 110% oxygen is the threshold for oxygen toxicity signs and symptoms can begin to occur. Now, again, that's 1.1. And as we kind of back up here, we can see that at just 33 feet, our partial pressure of oxygen is now at 42%. If we go down to 66 feet, that partial pressure of oxygen is going to be 63%, right? And at 99 feet, that partial pressure is going to be what? If it's 63 at 33, it's going to be 84% at 99 feet, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, in diving nitrox, if we're diving 32% nitrox, that number goes up much quicker. At 33 feet, it's 0.64. At 66 feet, it's 0.96. At 99 feet, it's 1.28. And you see how it climbs very quickly. That partial pressure of oxygen, the blue, climbs very quickly in the process. So give you kind of a real life, how does that work? So at 1.1 is the threshold where oxygen toxicity symptoms can occur and the risk starts to increase. At the level of 1.4 is the level at which oxygen presents a moderate risk to divers, and it's the recommended partial pressure limit for recreational divers. In other words, do not dive to a depth where the partial pressure of oxygen will increase over 1.4. Easy enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Now here's your extra little piece. At 1.6 is the partial pressure of oxygen level at which oxygen presents a more substantial risk to divers and the absolute partial pressure limit for recreational divers, period. Okay. Bad stuff starts happening. So we don't go over 1.4 partial pressure if we can help it. And 1.6 is our absolute max. So the benefits of breathing less nitrogen are pretty straightforward. We know from class that as the partial pressure of nitrogen starts to build, nitrogen becomes narcotic. And nitrogen narcosis is definitely a prevalent thing to be aware of. Another benefit to that as well is that if we're breathing less nitrogen, we are substantially less significant chance of having decompression sickness. Decompression sickness is caused by off-gassing of nitrogen from our tissue compartments. So if we're breathing less nitrogen, we have less chance of DCS. And the simple way to think about it is I always like to liken it to beer. If I drink less beer the night before, I have less hangover the day after, right? Is that a pretty simple way to think about it?
Yes.
Absolutely. And not that I drink or anything, but it makes a very easy way to think about it. So nitrogen, the sacrifice of nitrogen safety margin. So what you'll find some divers will do is instead of diving a nitrox table and giving themselves, for example, we gave the idea that if I at 60 feet on air, I could dive for 50 minutes, and on 60 feet of nitrox with 32%, I could dive for an hour and 30 minutes. Some divers will use that air table and say their limit is 50 minutes, but they'll dive 36% nitrox, where their limit is actually an hour and 30 minutes, giving themselves a substantial safety margin. Make sense? So that's what we mean when we say there's a sacrifice of nitrox safety margin. Now, Troy, my question to you is richer oxygen content better?
To a degree.
How so?
Because you probably wouldn't have to take in as much air when you breathe to get the same amount of oxygen molecules.
Not so much. Well, in terms of the easier way to think about it like this is a richer blend of oxygen better? Everything in moderation, right?
Right.
One cupcake with dinner is not going to make me obese, right? Hopefully. 18 cupcakes at dinner every night, not probably the best plan in the entire world, right? Not only would I just be fabulously sick, but I'd probably gain, 50 pounds a week. So in terms of is richer better, to a degree, and everything in moderation. I could certainly get a lot of great benefit out of diving nitrox, but I also have to remember that if I go to the limit, I start asking for problems and in terms of oxygen toxicity. So I want to certainly dive within the limits here, somewhere between 21 and 1.4. But if I dive too deeply or I use too rich a mix and I start getting to 1.6 or above, I run into a significant risk of getting into oxygen toxicity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a little is good. It's like they say with red wine. I hate red wine. I hate wine, period. But they say one glass of red wine is good for you because of the antioxidants or whatever it is in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
A bottle of wine, on the other hand, not so good for you. In fact, here's a better example. Harvard Medical School did a study a number of years ago. And they determined every male should eat 4 ounces of chocolate every day, and it reduces your chance of cancer by like 40%. Now, notice they said 4 ounces, not 4 pounds. And I love my chocolate, that's for sure. But 4 pounds of chocolate will probably kill me of heart disease before cancer will. 4 ounces of chocolate, good stuff, right? So everything in moderation.
Mm-hmm.
So as you guys may have noticed throughout diving, there are a lot of laws. And we use a lot of physics laws to go through the process. And here's a couple of them. Henry's law is actually fairly important, as well as Dalton's law. So Henry's law is basically the idea of how gas dissolves in a liquid and how that works. The easiest way to think about Henry's law is I like to jokingly call it Kool-Aid law. Okay, here's how to determine how Henry's law works. If I have a packet of Kool-Aid and I put it into a water pitcher and I just let it set, how fast will it mix and make Kool-Aid? Troy?
Won't.
Won't, really? Now, if I stir the crap out of it, how fast will it make Kool-Aid?
Pretty fast.
Absolutely. That's all we're talking about with dissolved gas in a liquid. And that's what Henry's law is Henry's law says that basically that a gas, the amount of gas will dissolve in a liquid is directly proportionate to the partial pressure of that gas and the temperature as well as the agitation of the liquid.
Okay.
So what we're basically saying is that the gas, whatever we're breathing, will dissolve into our bloodstream based upon its temperature and the agitation. The agitation would be what, Troy?
Pressure?
More like our heartbeat, right? How
Okay.
fast we're breathing and how fast our blood is circulating, right? How hard we're working. So agitation would be caused by your heart. Now, here's the other interesting part of it. At least I think so. You may be like, that's stupid, Benjamin, whatever. But it also has to do with the temperature. If it's cold, it will dissolve in the gas we're breathing will dissolve into the liquid, our blood, much quicker because it's denser. So while you'd think it'd be cold would make it go slower, cold makes it go faster because of the density. So that's your useless information for the day. Make sense?
So they have to detox faster. Detox faster because it's colder. If in colder weather, in colder
Actually,
water.
no. If it's cold, you will off gas slower. The gas gets into the bloodstream and into the tissue compartments, and it saturates the tissue compartments much quicker, and the off gases are much slower. So interesting enough. Good question though. That was a good observation. The other side of this that we deal with in nitrox is called Dalton's law. Dalton's law is the law of partial pressure. It basically just says that everything has to balance. If I have 1 cup of water, right, and I want to put, and I want to mix flour in it, it only holds 1 cup of content. So if I put flour in, I could put half a cup of flour in and half a cup of water in, or I could put a 1/4 cup of water in and 3/4 cup of flour in, and it'll equal 1 full part. So basically, Dalton's law is the law of partial pressures that's saying that all the parts have to equal up to 1 in a very equal, and that equals the total partial pressure. Now, here's where it just gets a little more complicated, but not by a lot. If I compress the molecules and the size of that molecule goes smaller, and I'm at 2 atmospheres, everything still has to add up. So if I'm at 2 atmospheres, then everything has to add up to 200%. If I'm at 3 atmospheres, everything has to add up to 300%. That's all we're really saying. That's all Dalton's law is saying, that everything has to add up to the atmospheric pressure total. So if we're at 1 atmosphere, everything has to add up to 100%. If we're at 200%, everything has to add up to, or if we're at 2 atmospheres, everything has to add up to 200%. That's all we're really saying with that. It's definitely not super complicated before we get through that. So the interesting thing about Dalton's law is the basis for most nitrox calculations. And I can put the formula on the screen, and it's insanely boring. PG equals FG times P, where PG is the partial pressure. And I've already fallen asleep. Would you guys like a little bit simpler way to figure this out rather than PG equals FG times P?
Very much so.
Absolutely. Me too. So Dalton's law practical application. So we have to get a few basic ideas out of the way first. Simple enough. Oxygen is 21%. Nitrogen is 79%. That's what the air we're breathing. 33 feet seawater, or 33 feet is 2 atmospheres. 66 feet is 3 atmospheres. Okay. So utilizing this basic math, we know that the air we're breathing at 2 atmospheres, which is 33 feet, times 21% oxygen equals 42%. Simple enough. And that's where 2 atmospheres equals 33 feet. 3 atmospheres, where 30 atmospheres equals 66 feet, 3 times 0.21 equals 63. Pretty simple math so far, guys?
Yes.
So I get some basics out of the way. And the other side of the same coin, we need to make sure we're taking into account the nitrogen. So if at 2 atmospheres, we have 79% nitrogen, that means the total partial pressure of the nitrogen is 1.58. Pretty easy math so far? This is all Dalton's really tight. I just want to get some basics out of the way. So a couple of safety notes. Oxygen becomes toxic at 1.6 partial pressure. And the working load for oxygen safety needs to be 1.4 or less. Another safety note for you, just real quick. Nitrogen starts to become narcotic at 2.37% and becomes unsafe at 3.95. Here's what it looks like. Nitrogen will be equal to 1 martini on an empty stomach at 100 feet, increase exponentially from there. So a couple of quick safety notes for you. So easy enough. Here's the formula. It's easy enough. Depth divided by 33 equals atmospheres, right? So 33 feet divided by 33 equals 1. Easy enough. So we're 2 atmospheres total. 1.4 working load ATA divided by the actual ATA equals our best mix. So here's what I'm trying to come up with for you guys. Patrick, Troy, you guys and I decided we were going to go dive the Lady Luck. And the Lady Luck's deck, where we want to dive, is 115 feet.
Right.
Okay. Easy enough. We want to figure out, we're going to call up the shop and say, Stuart Scuba, We are coming out to dive the Lady Luck, and I want nitrox for that's the best, the most efficient, and absolute best blend of nitrox I can get so I can dive the Lady Luck. But how would we know what that blend is? Because we want to make sure we tell them, I want to dive this blend of nitrox. Here's how we do that. We say, if the diver wishes to make a 115-foot dive, what is the best mixture for this dive? Easy enough. We say 115 feet divided by 33 feet seawater is 3.48, and we add 1. And the reason we add 1 is because that's the surface atmospheric pressure. That gives us the absolute pressure. So that equals 4.48. 1.4 is the working load partial pressure of the oxygen we want to breathe. Max, we want to breathe. So that 1.4 divided by 4.48 equals 31% nitrox. Now, how will this affect your nitrogen exposure, guys? If I'm breathing 31% nitrox, Patrick, how is that affecting my exposure to nitrox?
Hold on, I'm still doing the math. 1.4 working load. Yeah.
In simplest terms, if I'm breathing a 31% blend of nitrox, how does that affect the nitrogen that I'm breathing? Am I breathing less nitrogen and thus a little safer?
Yeah. Percentage wise, yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, here's the good news, guys. Troy, do you still have your cell phone handy?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Patrick, can you pull your cell phone out for me?
Yes.
Would you guys please, open up your cell phone and open up the My SSI app, if you would, please. It is a black and red app. Once you get there, Troy, let me know when you're there.
I'm on the main page.
Okay. Troy, how you coming?
I'm on the SSI app, but I don't see.
Perfect. That's awesome. So once you've got the My SSI app open, lower right-hand corner says More.
Okay.
Once you open up click the More, lower left-hand corner will be a green button that says Tables.
Got it.
Perfect. Yep. If you wouldn't mind, scroll down, and you will see a white and pink. It says Best Gas Mix Table. If you wouldn't mind, make sure to open that in US Imperial. It'll make your life substantially easier. You guys got that open?
Yep.
Troy, on that table, if I wanted to dive to 115 feet, what is the best blend of nitrox that I could use?
31.
31 is exactly right. So there's the good news. You now know how to do the math to get there, but even easier, you also know how to find the table to get there as well.
That's what I like right there.
I told you I would make it easy. I want you guys to understand the math. The math is important. And I'll tell you right now, when you guys see Nikki next Saturday, make sure to ask her, when is the last time Benjamin opened up a table and used the table to figure out our nitrox or trimix blends? She will tell you never. I just don't do it. I use a calculator. The math is super easy once you've practiced it a few times. But I would like to practice it if you wouldn't mind. So here's the basic formula. You guys have a calculator handy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Guys, I want to do a dive to 100 feet with my, or 110 feet, I'm sorry, with my partial pressure max of 1.4. What is my best blend of nitrox on 110 feet without looking at the table, Troy? Because I need a decimal here.
I'm getting my other calculator out. Okay, how deep are we?
110 feet. And I've got the formula on the calculator for you.
Oh. We are at 1.4. No, we're at what am I looking for what am I looking for here?
We would like 32%.
According to the table, what's the percent? Just to make sure you're not cheating on me, what is the decimal?
Oh, 0.32310177771.
There you go. That's the math. It's not hard. Here's the formula on, and I can make it larger if that helps you. Let's see, format. Possibly I can make it bigger. There we go. So, same math. If I want to do an 80-foot dive, Troy,
Okay.
what is my best blend of nitrox at 80 feet?
2.42. That's plus 3.42. So
Got to go the other way. Yeah, 3.42 is the our atmosphere. But what's my best blend of nitrox?
I would.
So it's going to be 1.4 divided by that 3.4242.
Oh! It's divided by you divide the. Okay, I'm getting it. I'm just a slow learner. Sorry.
You're fine.
Around 40, 41, 40.9.
40.88 is what it should come out to.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go. Good job, guys. I just want you guys to understand the math basically, but the good news is go to your app. You can actually take a screenshot of this and you're good to go. Make sure you just know how to find this, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Easy enough?
Got it. Yeah.
That's all there is to doing the partial pressure. The other side of this, guys, is what is my maximum operating depth? What's the deepest I can go if I'm handed a bottle of nitrox that is 36%? What is the deepest I can dive on that 36%? If I don't order my nitrox, I jump on a boat and they've got 36% nitrox, I need to know what my maximum operating depth, otherwise known as your mod, is. If you guys would both please go back to your phones, same place, tables, you will find another table just a little farther down called maximum operating depth. And if you'd open that up in English, please.
Okay.
English Imperial.
Mm-hmm.
Easy enough. Now, the good news is the math is exactly the same. It's just instead of solving for X, we're solving for Y. Okay? It's really simple algebra. So simple enough. We've got to remember that you guys need to make sure you're staying at a partial pressure of 1.4 or less. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Now, here's how we figure out maximum operating rate. It's 1.4 divided by whatever the partial pressure of the cylinder is. In this particular case, we said 36%. Minus 1. Troy, why are we subtracting 1 from from this formula?
Is that because the atmospheric pressure at sea level?
That's exactly right. Good job. That equals our ATA times 33. So we've got our atmospheric pressure, multiply that by 33, and that will give us our depth. Easy enough. So if a diver wants to know how deep he can dive on a mixture of 40% nitrox, he simply takes 1.4 divided by 0.4. That gives him 3.5 atmospheres. 3.5 atmospheres minus 1, that's the surface equivalent, gives him 2.5. That's gauge pressure, right? Gauge atmospheric pressure. 2.5 times 33 equals 82.5 feet. Let's check my math. Maybe I didn't do it right, but let's check. 82. Let's see. We were using 40%, so 40% down here, right here. They rounded up to 83. So 1.4 at 83 feet. That's our maximum depth we can go. Easy enough, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How simple is that? We've got charts. We now know how to do the math. You guys are algebra experts at this point. Good to go. Easy enough. All right, well, let's continue on. So one of the things that we need to worry about as we start getting a little deeper in our diving, one of the things that this helps with is nitrogen narcosis. We want to make sure that we are being aware of what nitric narcosis does and can be. And Aaron, when I start getting into your section, let me know and just raise your hand or flag me or just jump in or whatever you need to do.
Okay.
So nitric narcosis, I've got a fun little video for you guys. Potentially. Here we
One
go.
of the best things about diving is the effects of nitrogen narcosis. It's like being drunk underwater, but you don't get any of the hangover. Some divers get narked easier than others. It just depends on how deep you go and how susceptible you are to the calls of the nitrogen mistress. Now, as you all probably know, some people do pretty stupid stuff when drunk. All you have to do is visit your local drunk tank at the police station on a Friday night and ask for or if you're the one in the drunk tank, the cops will tell you why you're there in the following morning. But people do some stupid stuff when narked, and most people don't even know they're narked. So it can be useful for you to understand some telltale signs that your buddy is narked so that you can be the designated diver and look after them and get them home safely. And such, hi, I'm Mark, and here are 5 ways to tell if your dive buddy is narked. They keep staring at themselves in your mask. You're effectively drugged by the gas that you are breathing the deeper you go, and such your inhibitions are lessened. And as we all know, we are all narcissists at heart when we lose our inhibitions, aren't we? No. I mean, let's face it, I'll bet you anything that your social media picture is you scuba diving, isn't it? Not men and women are like magpies, and they love shiny objects. And when they look at you, they're probably not actually looking and engaging with you. They're just looking at themselves or the mirror copy of themselves from the mirror dimension in the shiny lens of your mask. You find them buddy breathing with a fish. I've actually heard this a couple of times, and this is the other type of drunk, the considerate drunk. These narked individuals will be concerned at all of the fish in the water and their lack of breathing apparatus. After all, they've spent a lot of time learning how important their regulators are and to always keep breathing. So they'll often donate their regulator to these fish that, to be honest, they don't really need it. They wave back at fish. I would do that normally. Hey, buddy. The third type of drunk is the happy drunk, who is observant and sees his crowds of fans in the fishes and all their little fins waving at them, so it would be rude not to wave back, right? Yeah, if your buddy is waving back at the fish, they're probably not, or, way too young to be scuba diving. I'm not too young. Mental age. Fish are cool, and they move their pectorals pretty much all the time, but while they are aware that you are there, I'm sorry, but they ain't waving at you. Documentaries, those were. Their mask fogs underwater, and they spit in it. Much like people who defog the outside of their mask before a dive, you aren't going to get much benefit of spitting in your mask during the dive. I have seen this before, and it was a dive guide, so I really hope he wasn't knocked at the time. I just figured he was showing off. Your mask fogs up, and he spits in your mask. Yeah, enough said. Considerate of them, but just stay away from my mask. I can do it myself. At least it's spit. It's from weird. I won't put it past him. Yeah, it's so dark. He spits in his dry suit and loses. So what have you seen in the wild from the rare underwater species Homo narcosis? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Safe diving. We are an online.
So there you go. So nitrogen narcosis is definitely the mistress of the dark. There's a lot of different theories on what causes nitrogen narcosis. We got the quasi-metabolic theory, the clathrate theory. We've got the iceberg theory. The most common and most accepted generally is the Myers-Overton theory. And basically what it's trying to tell you is that as the nitrogen builds up in your system and becomes narcotic, it reduces the ability of the receptors in your brain to fire and receive information left to right. Simple enough, nitrogen narcosis looks something like this. There are many predisposing factors that can increase the severity of nitrogen narcosis. These symptoms and factors are carbon dioxide buildup, rapid ascent, cold, certain drugs and medications, limited visibility in darkness, loss of orientation, high air consumption, breathing really quickly, Inexperience at depths below that, task loading, lack of sleep, exertion, psychological outlook, expecting things to be bad, anxiety, time, pressure, and fatigue. So interesting enough, as we kind of look at those, it's interesting to make the note that a lot of these are just purely mentally driven, right? As we kind of think about it, let's look at those. Let's see, rapid descent, we can definitely control that. We can cold, lack of drugs. Let's see, limited visibility to darkness, that's a mental issue. Loss of orientation, that's a mental issue. Let's see, task loading, a mental issue. Psychological outlook, that's a mental issue. Anxiety, mental issue. Time pressure, mental issue. And so as we kind of look at that, our brain can kick in and help us cause nitrogen narcosis based upon how we're perceiving and how we're looking at things. Now, what does nitrogen narcosis feel like and look like? Well, simply enough, nitrogen narcosis can be a feeling of relaxation, lightheadedness, euphoria, you kind of get loopy, slowed response, a feeling of well-being. Increased judgmental errors is extremely common, or even giddiness. Deterioration of fine motor ability and dexterity. Fixation on ideas, time distortion, deterioration of multitask reasoning. I can't do more than one thing at a time anyway. So yeah, that's a problem. But anyway, let's see, numbness, tingling, sleepiness, inability to remember parts of dive is a huge one that we hear a lot of. Confusion, semi-consciousness, distorted memory of the dive. That's another very common one. Decreased conceptual reasoning, visual hallucination, auditory hallucination, and paranoia and anxiety. All very common. In the deep diving industry, or in deep dive wrecks on the East Coast, when they used to do a lot of just pure air dives to very deep depths, they used to have a joke that they'd say that I've been there, I've dove that, and I forgot about that. They would do these really deep dives and to get all narked out, it would definitely be a problem. So does nitrogen narcosis cause any complications? What do you think, Troy?
Yeah, safety wise, especially if you're taking your air out, trying to give it to fish or whatever, share.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Absolutely. It's definitely a safety concern. But here's the thing. Nitrogen narcosis is fairly common and it's temporary. But but that doesn't mean it can't have lasting effects. Now, some divers who develop nitrogen narcosis become too disoriented to swim to shallower depths. And in other cases, divers can slip into a coma while still deep underwater. Now, trying to get yourself back to the surface can also lead to complications. So if you rise too quickly, you could develop DCS and have problems with that as well. So here's the thing. Seek medical treatment if you experience any of the following symptoms after coming back to the water surface. If you have fatigue, appetite loss, headache, tender joint or muscle pain, swelling, dizziness, pain in the chest, trouble breathing, double vision, speaking difficulties, muscle weakness, primarily on one side of your body, or flu-like symptoms. Now, here's the thing about diving, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. Diving is the most self-aware sport that I am aware of, by far. How you feel going in the water is how you should feel coming out of the water. So be aware. Watch your dive buddy and watch yourself. Fair enough?
Do they lose sensitivity of time? Do they forget time if you get that?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
Then they get down and run out of air if they're down there. And
Time distortion is a common one, absolutely.
Then here comes a panic and bad things. You know.
Have you ever been to the dentist and they put the gas on you?
Yeah.
That's exactly what narcosis feels like. And that's what they're doing at the dentist, is putting nitrous oxide on you. So that fuzzy-headed feeling, how you kind of just floating around, that's the best way I can describe it, is exactly like being in the dentist chair.
Yeah. And in fact, it affects different people different ways, but it's a narcotic. So be aware. So, Patrick, how do you think we treat nitrogen narcosis?
Um, I mean, treated as an immediate or
Yeah, how do you
treated
treat
as in, okay.
overall? You're at
Um,
90 feet and you're getting narked. What do you do? How do you treat that?
you ascend to a safer uh, depth and allow your body to probably acclimate and stop being, or it wouldn't be a decompression stop, would it? But basically ascend and
Yeah, you're on the right track.
yeah.
Yeah, the main treatment for nitric
Uh,
narcosis is simply get yourself to the water surface or shallower. If
mhm,
your symptoms are mild, you can stay shallower waters with your dive partner or team while you wait for them to clear.
yeah.
Instantly enough. Now, here's the interesting thing. Why do you think I'm certifying you guys only to 60 feet?
I think that might have something to do with the table, right? No.
Safety, I'm sure.
So, Troy, what were we just talking about?
Well, if somebody starts having this problem, and you're a buddy to them, things. There's a lot of things can go bad. I would think of a lot of things as far as just
Sure.
the
What do you
band.
think? Yeah, what do you think the shallowest known case of nitrogen narcosis is?
I don't
60
know.
feet.
60 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why do you guys think I'm certifying you guys right now to 60 feet?
So we don't kill ourselves.
Nitrogen narcosis. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the shallowest known case of DCS is 60 feet.
Okay.
So that's why. And so to get past that, we teach you deep dive class, and we start giving you the understanding of what nitrogen narcosis is and how to work through the process of that as well. And deep dive is a great class, and we start building up additional skills so that you're able to handle through those kind of things and do a better job and be safe. So we don't want you to get into a situation where you're dangerous. I encourage deep diving class. I think it's an amazing class, and there's amazing stuff past the 60-foot mark. And we'll start picking that up and teaching that in the spring again. So something to definitely look at for you guys.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things to be aware of is as we kind of we're going to move past the nitrogen narcosis is what are the effects of oxygen on the diver? Well, there's a couple things to be aware of. The first one's hypoxia or anoxia. Troy, what's hypoxia?
Hypo is too low.
Exactly. So if I'm getting into a hypoxic environment, I'm not enough oxygen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're dealing with nitrox, so hypoxia is not going to be a bigger issue for us to a certain degree. Now, certainly hypercapnia is definitely something happens for a whole different reason. We talk about that at deep diving because of the density of the gas. But what we're really gonna more focus on is anoxia. Patrick, what's anoxia?
Anoxia would probably be an overabundance of oxygen.
Yeah, anoxia. Or it's not anoxia, it's anoxia. Sorry. So there's a couple different things to be aware of, and there's two different prevalent things that happen with hyperoxia or anoxia.
Mhm.
Simple enough, it can damage the pulmonary system, and it can also damage the central nervous system, the nerves, the brain, and things like that. So it's really only two things. It's high intensities of oxygen aren't going to cause a skin irritation, but they will. But because since we're breathing, it can damage the pulmonary, how we breathe, the heart, the lungs, the pulmonary system. It can also damage the neurological system. So those are the things that we're going to certainly worry about as well. We've talked a little bit about that. But when we start getting into this, there's the first part that we really worry about is the CNS, central nervous system toxicity. That's when we get too high a partial pressure in the central nervous system, and the brain and the nervous system can't handle it. Okay. The other side of that is called oxygen toxicity, pulmonary oxygen toxicity. Now, it's interesting. In 1899, that was the first study of pulmonary oxygen toxicity. And that was studied by Dr. J. Lorraine Smith. And that was a guy, John Lorraine Smith. And he first described it. And he noted that the severity of the effect increased with the increase of the effects of pulmonary oxygen toxicity, increased with the higher partial pressure of oxygen, but that the effects were largely reversible. Now, the toxic effects of oxygen at partial pressures between 0.45 and 1.6 are primarily in the lungs. And the toxic effect of partial pressures over 1.6 are primarily in the brain. Simple enough?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is we kind of go through this. Pulmonary oxygen toxicity, and the earliest signs of pulmonary or lung oxygen toxicity, it starts off with a mild irritation in the throat. And this gets worse with deeper breathing. Next, after that, a mild cough starts to develop, followed by more severe irritation and cough until breathing becomes very painful and the cough becomes uncontrollable. Now, if exposure to oxygen is continued, the person's going to notice tightness of the chest, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath. And if the exposure continues long enough, the person will die from literally lack of oxygen. Literally, the too high a partial pressure of oxygen for too long literally stops the hemoglobin barrier in the lungs from being able to process oxygen into the lungs. It overwhelms it, and you will not be able to pass any oxygen. So the progressive damage to the lungs eventually makes it impossible for the oxygen to get past the blood as it passes through the lungs. Easy enough. Now, here's the truth about pulmonary oxygen toxicity. The time to onset of symptoms is highly variable, but most individuals can tolerate 12 hours at 1.0 at 100% oxygen, up to 16 hours. So if you're in the hospital and they've got you on pure oxygen, you should be able to be fine in the pulmonary region for 12 to 16 hours. 8 to 14 hours if you're in a partial pressure environment where it's at 1.5, and 3 to 6 hours if the partial pressure is at 2.0 before developing mild symptoms. Now, there's several ways to track pulmonary oxygen toxicity, but the most sensitive and most accurate is what? What do you think? What's the most accurate way to track pulmonary oxygen toxicity, Troy?
I would guess your exhale. What you're exhaling?
More accurately, give me. How would I tell about how as a doctor? How would I tell a patient has pulmonary oxygen toxicity? What's the most accurate way I could possibly use?
Blood sample.
I've got a blood sample would be one idea. Patrick, what do you think?
Symptoms is really the only way.
Yeah, the development of symptoms is the most accurate way. Now, a second technique is to use a monitor, like a vital capacity monitor. But in a vital capacity monitor is the amount of air that can be moved in one breath. And if we see a decrease or in that, it could be because of increased pulmonary toxicity. Now, a reduction of approximately 2% in vital capacity through a test correlates with mild symptoms, and about 10% correlates with severe symptoms. Now, here's the good news. The mild effects are completely reversible and no permanent lung damage will happen. However, it could take 2 to 4 weeks to heal. Pretty cool.
So that's
Quick
how much
question.
Exhale out of your lungs then.
Yeah, it's not great, but you'll heal, right? Now, CNS toxicity is a little bit different, right? As we go through this process, the easiest way to develop and understand if CNS is becoming a problem is obviously to monitor our exposure to the oxygen. But if something bad happens and we're starting to wonder, is this person suffering from CNS toxicity? We can remember the acronym CONVENTID. 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 Now, that stands for convulsions, like grand mal seizures, vision, like tunnel vision or any other vision changes, ears ringing, nausea, mild to severe, continuous or even intermittent, twitching, usually in the facial is most common, irritability, and dizziness. Well, let's go ahead and throw that on the screen. I actually have that one. There you go. So CONVENTID. If you see anything like this, there's a good chance that they are suffering from CNS toxicity. Now, Troy, as I look at this, which are signs you would notice in somebody else?
Of course, the seizures
Absolutely.
be very drastic. They can't stand up, or they feel like they don't have balance, vertigo
Mhm.
problems. All of them, I guess.
Well,
Unless,
you really wouldn't notice ringing in their ears.
no, I couldn't. All of it couldn't notice all of them, but the twitching, irritability, vision. I guess if you asked them, but you could probably see if they're having problems. Maybe observe it a little bit. But
Absolutely.
sure.
So as you guys go through this, I want you to start thinking, well, how do I feel during my or after my dive? But you also need, if you've dived with your buddy long enough, Troy, I'd imagine if your wife got irritable, you might know something's wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
If she was dizzy, you'd probably realize there's something going on, right?
Yeah.
So as you dive with your buddies, keep an eye on them, right? There are some divers out there that may not notice this happening, and they may get to the point they're like, and try and deny it, and they try and be strongman. I mean, we as guys do that all the time. I come out of the water and I've had a really big dive. I did a 3-hour dive to 150 feet, and I come back with a headache. My wife asked me, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine." It's not the best. Be aware, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of what's going on. So, guys, as we go through this, as you dive deeper, the narcotic effect of nitrogen gets what, Troy?
Worse.
You got some answers on the screen here.
Oh. My glasses, I can't see that short of print right there.
Is that better?
Yeah, I'd say greater D.
D is exactly right. By the way, these are sample questions from your final exam. Patrick, your turn. Which of the following is not a symptom of decompression sickness?
Sorry, I'm giving it a lot of thought here. I'm bouncing between tingling or numbness in the extremities or cyanosis, bluish skin color. But I think deco can cause blue lips, right?
Nope.
No, it doesn't.
Nope.
All right, I would go with cyanosis.
Yep. That's usually hypothermia or hypercapnia.
Right.
So,
oh, that might be.
yep.
Yeah.
All right. Troy,
Okay.
even if a diver suffers from decompression sickness in a remote location, you should never
I'd say D.
D is exactly right. Good job.
Back in the water, yeah.
Patrick, hypoxic hypoxia is by far the most common form of hypoxia. And that sentence is just fun to say, by the way. This condition is where hypoxia.
Is where the partial pressure. I believe it's A, where the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood is too low.
That's
right?
exactly right. That's correct.
Okay.
Troy, when oxygen pressure in the body drops below partial pressure of 1.7 ATA, mild symptoms of hypoxia occur. Blackout and death may occur if the partial pressure drops to
1.6, isn't it?
that's too high. Where do we die?
Oh,
When
too
do we
low.
die? Too low.
Was it 10? I think it was 10. D.
Yep. 10%. D is exactly right. All right, Patrick, one more. A possible source of contaminated air in scuba cylinders is?
A. All the answers are correct.
Yep, absolutely.
Mhm.
All right. Let's touch on a little bit of decompression theory. So as we kind of start talking about decompression and how our body absorbs and off-gasses nitrogen, it's a very interesting story. We started with Paul Burt in the late 1800s, and it was picked up by Haldane in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was working for the British Admiralty at the time. And so Haldane was trying to figure out why these people for the Brooklyn Bridge, for example, would come up after a long dive and they'd get the bends. And so he's going through this process trying to figure this out. And he came up with the idea that, wow, if the pressure of what we're breathing is twice as much as what we have at the surface, that seems to cause the bends. And we need to do something about that. That was his simple solution, right? In very short words. Fast forward a little bit to the 50s. And we've got Captain Robert Workman, who decided, wait a minute, Haldane, you were close. I like your thinking there, but here's the deal. I think it's not the overall. I think it's the partial pressure of the nitrogen. And that when the partial pressure of nitrogen gets to a 2-to-1 ratio, then that's when we get the bends. And for the longest time, he thought he was right. He came up with what's called Workman's critical difference. Now, interestingly enough, Workman was later proven to be wrong, but he wasn't too far off the correct idea as well. And so later on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we enter Albert Bullman. And Bullman came in and he said, I get what you're saying, but you're not quite idea, because the problem is you're looking at what's coming in, not where it's going. And where it's going is more important than what's coming in. And so he said, the partial pressure of oxygen and nitrogen are going in, and the nitrogen specifically is going in, and it's going into tissue compartments. And how nitrogen is absorbed is different in different parts of our body. For example, nitrogen will not perfuse or not absorb into fat nearly as fast as it absorbs into our brainstem. Into our bones, our muscles is a different speed. It goes faster in our muscles than fat, but slower than our brainstem. So he studied this out, and he came up with a theory that there's 16 theoretical compartments throughout the body. And so he basically said, Workman, you're not far off. I get where you're going, but you're looking at the wrong side of the coin. And so oddly enough, we go back to Haldane, and most decompression theory is still based upon Haldane's models overall. So it's really interesting to kind of go through the idea. So we kind of come back into understanding, once we get the idea of Bullman's model of it absorbing into the tissue compartments, all of a sudden, Henry, who was studying absorption of gas into a liquid back in the 1800s, now he comes back into play. And Henry basically said, okay, I get it. The partial pressure of the gas goes into a liquid based upon the agitation and how warm or cold it is. And so now Henry's law all of a sudden makes sense, because now it adds into Robert Bullman based upon the partial pressure. So it gets really super interesting as we kind of go through that. And there's a whole idea of how this works. So what ends up happening is, as we breathe in, we're breathing in, goes down the trachea into the lungs. In the lungs, that air we breathe goes into the alveolar, and there's about 300 million of those little bad boys. It goes into the arterial gas network, and it goes into the tissue compartments. And as it goes into these tissues, like the fat, the bone, the muscle, the brainstem, all this, we say that it perfuses. That's our medical term for the day. It perfuses or absorbs into the tissue. And as it absorbs in as we're going deeper, because the partial pressure of the gas is thicker, and our body wants to equalize to that partial pressure. Now, the exact opposite happens as we get ready to eliminate that gas. We start coming up, and our bodies want to equalize to the lower partial pressure of nitrogen that we're now breathing. So what happens is that nitrogen now needs to defuse from the tissue compartments, and it eliminates in the form of silent bubbles to bubble seeds to symptomatic bubbles. The bigger the bubble, the bigger the problem it could be. So if we come up slowly enough and we use our safety stops correctly, those bubbles will remain extremely small, and they will eliminate out of the tissues into the venous system. From the venous system, they'll pump to the lungs and will exhale those nitrogen bubbles out naturally. It's not a big deal. But we want to make sure.
That made me think of a interesting. So my science teacher always said the body's always trying to achieve homeostasis.
It is,
which is that balance, and that's just kind of an interesting way to help me remember it, I think.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what's happening. Our bodies are about equilibrium. Everything we do, everything we are, our bodies want to be in equilibrium with the environment around us. Okay.
Yeah.
Homeostasis is a way to think about it, but it's really the term we're looking for is equilibrium. So if the partial pressure of the air we're breathing, like we're right now, we're at a very high altitude, right? So the partial pressure we're breathing is about 0.18. So our bodies are perfused to a partial pressure of 0.18. That's what we get used to doing. And as we acclimatize to that, it becomes natural. Our brain kicks in and says, okay, the oxygen's at 0.18. Fantastic. That's the amount of oxygen I need to release throughout the brain, throughout the body to properly off gas and get rid of the carbon dioxide that I'm creating as waste. It creates an equilibrium. Same thing as we go down. We get down to 33 feet where the partial pressure is 158%. Our body says, okay, it's time to equalize, come to equilibrium with everything around us. Make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the things that happened is the Navy created the Navy dive tables. And the history of the Navy dive tables is actually fairly interesting. Around the time Robert Workman was doing his due diligence, the Navy came to Scripps Institute and they created the Naval Experimental Diving Unit. And they said, we need to do something to save our divers. Fair enough. We don't want them to get the bends because finding more dumb 19-year-old kids that want to join the Navy and do stupid things, there's a specific limit of those that are available to us, right? Troy, you teach high school students. There's only so many dumb students that you can get to do something easily, right? The rest of them are too smart and go to college.
Yeah,
So,
don't go in there.
So they said, we need to figure out a way to measure this. And they said, they came back and Scripps said, okay. And Noah said, we're on board with you. Help us understand what you're looking for. He says, and they said, how deep do you want them to go? And for how long do you want them to stay? And they said, okay, how deep, the minimum time in action that we will be able to send them down. We want to be able to send them down for 10 minutes. That's the maximum amount of time we want to be able to send them down. And they said, great. If you send them down for 10 minutes, you can send them down to 140 feet. That was it. If you keep them at 140 feet for 10 minutes or less, you're good to go. They can come back to the surface, do a slight safety stop, and they're going to be fine. Now, oddly enough, this is one of the very few times I've noticed that our federal government and the Navy was actually really, really smart. You can count on one hand and have four fingers left over the time the Navy was smart. Fair enough, right? I'm a Marine, so I can say that, right? So here's the deal. What they realized, Patrick, is even better, Troy, how smart, truthfully, in terms of doing dumb stuff, is your average 18-year-old?
Well, they do a lot of dumb stuff.
They do a lot of dumb stuff. And the Navy realized that these 18-year-old kids weren't the smartest things on 2 feet because there was a lot of testosterone and other things going through their body, and they just didn't know what was going on. So, Troy, if you sent one of your kids out to the football field and you said you can only stay out there for 10 minutes and there was a whole mess of cheerleaders out there, how long is he going to be out there?
For the full 10 minutes.
You think he might accidentally stay for 20?
Oh, yeah. If
accidentally, right?
If he could, he would more, yeah.
Yep. And if you told that same high schooler that he could only go to the 50-yard line and the cheerleaders were all at the end zone, do you think he'd stay just at the 50-yard line?
No.
You have pushed to go to the 40 or the 30?
Probably. They definitely pushed the limit.
Yeah, they pushed the boundary. Well, the Navy realized this as well. And what they said is, okay, if I can send a diver to 140 feet for 10 minutes, let's back that out because these kids aren't the smartest things on 2 feet. So we'll tell them, if we tell them they can go to 130 feet and they go to 140 feet, we're still okay. If we tell them they can go down for 5 minutes and they stay for 10 minutes, we're still okay. So that's exactly what they did. So as they built the dive tables, they said 130 feet for 5 minutes is as long as you can stay, with the realization that they're in a foreign environment, they're getting excited, they got testosterone and all kinds of other hormones running through their bodies. So if they stay a little longer, we're still probably okay. So as they built the dive tables, they actually built in a base safety model already, which is really, really nice through this process. As we kind of move through the process a little farther into the mix, we come into the 70s, and dive computers had been theorized for a long time, but we didn't have any way to build a dive computer. Computers just weren't that small. Troy, you and I remember back in the days of the Commodore 64 and the Texas Instrument computer, right? It wasn't the fastest, smartest, coolest thing out, right? We thought it was, but by comparison with my my Garmin watch or my Apple iPhone, it was a dinosaur. So
Correct.
In the 70s, they came up with the idea that said, wait a minute, we could finally build a computer, but the first computers designed for diving were actually classified. They were classified top secret because our Navy wanted to be able to put our divers down for the max efficiency amount of time and keep them down there and not let our enemies know how long they could stay down. So that's kind of how dive computers came along. Aaron, am I at your point? You're muted.
He kept himself.
You're still muted. There you go.
Hit mute and unmuted and then muted again. Yeah, so I think we're at that point. Do you have your slide still?
Yep,
up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
What slide do you need?
So I guess we can use that one. So dive computers, like Benjamin was saying, definitely started off being only for kind of like everything else. The military develops it and then we get them further down the road. One thing that using the right equipment helps us with in nitrox diving is a lot of the new computers have the ability for us to program what gas we're diving. So if we programmed in that we have a 36% or a 32% or a 40% nitrox blend, the computers will factor that in and help us stay out of that dangerous zone where our body is susceptible to that oxygen toxicity. It also can have a lot longer dive time because I know when you probably went over this in the open water class, is our dive an actual, like say we're going to do a 40-foot dive for 45 minutes. Are we always perfectly straight at 40 feet? Troy?
No, we're not. It probably goes
No.
up. Yeah.
Up and down, right? We go over the coral, we go over there to see a fish. And so the dive computers actually take that into account and can help us have longer dives. So if we went to the dive tables and we saw that, hey, a 40-foot dive, we can only do that for 105 minutes. If you actually took it on the computer, you could probably get down to, a lot longer than that, depending on what your dive profile does and how much time you spend above that 40-foot mark. So that is one definite advantage of having a computer. And the other thing, like I said, is being able to program the type of gas you're using. And then you get into the technical diving, deeper diving and stuff where we're using decompression gases that are 60, 70%. We program the computers to be able to use those gases, and our decompression time is a lot less, or our time to the surface is a lot less. So just like anything else, the technology has made it a lot easier for us to get more out of our dives, be safer during our dives. The other thing that you'd want to look at is, do you know what the computer can do, right? So, Patrick, have you ever dove with a dive computer?
Negative, I have not.
You haven't? So, would you get a whole lot out of it by just grabbing one off the shelf and running down and doing a dive with it?
No, and in fact, I would probably think it would be a little dangerous.
Yeah. So, having the right computer for what you're doing, but also having the right training to use the computer. So, the dive shop sells many different models of computers, that from just an introductory, like what we've got typically on the rental gear there, that just tracks your bottom time, your ascent and descent rates, to very advanced technical diving computers. We also have a class that we teach that goes over how to use those computers. So, computer diving class. That's an awesome opportunity if you're going to get into using a computer, get that training so you know how that computer works and how it can benefit you, and then know the features and what it means. The Sunto that you see there on the screen is a very, I would say, user-friendly, big letters, easy to see, nice and bright when you're underwater. Not a whole lot of extra information. It tells you what the temperature, your depth, your dive time, how long you've got left on your no-deco limits, as well as if you buy the air integration pods, it'll actually tell you what's left in your tank, which is a pretty nice feature of these newer computers. You want to go to the next slide, Ben?
I was going to ask you, do those hook up to your tank, or are they just on the wrist?
So these ones, the computer's on your wrist, just like a watch. The pods screw into the high pressure port. So the same port where you would have a normal pressure gauge.
Okay.
You would have the pod. And there's most of the regulators, especially the ones that we're selling there at the shop, would have more than one high pressure port. So you could have just a standard pressure gauge like you've seen before, as well as a place to put the pod in. Different types. So this is just a dive watch type. Pretty simple. This is a Mares. I have a Garmin that does GPS and stuff too. So there's a lot of different types, and that's why the training is pretty important for those. So when we talk about equipment, it's not just, say, computers that help us be safe and monitor the kind of gas we're using during our dive. There's also a few things we need to understand about the equipment we're going to use while we dive nitrox. Any particular reason why we might think that, Troy? What our equipment's doing?
Just guessing, maybe because there's more concentrated oxygen, you might need your pressure on your intake is probably less. I don't know.
Not really the pressure. So when we talk about our total diving system, I know you've heard that term probably more times than you care to remember during the classes. But that involves our tank, our regulators, first and second stage regulators, our BC, all of those things that make up that total dive system. Those play an important part in getting us the air that we need to breathe. Oxygen can actually have a corrosive effect on a lot of petroleum type products. And so being able to know that our equipment is rated to handle that, you couldn't just take a normal off the shelf regulator that isn't rated to use oxygen and throw 100% oxygen in. It could cause O-ring failures, and a lot of silicone lubricants, if they're not specially formulated, can actually catch fire with oxygen, because oxygen is a combustible or accelerant for combustible materials. And so as we look at our equipment, we've got to make sure that it's designed for what we need to do. So our equipment is not, or I guess scuba equipment in general wasn't originally designed for use with nitrox. The black O-rings, the normal rubber O-rings aren't made to handle that. So Patrick, how would you know if your regulator that you bought is rated to handle nitrox? What do you think the best way to figure that out is?
Well, if it's not explicitly like stated in the literature for it, I'd probably go with the safe assumption that it's not, but you could probably call and check with the manufacturer. There's probably a few other options that I'm not coming up with right now.
So one of the reasons that we, I guess, push for you guys to take your equipment to an authorized dealer is they will make sure that when they're rebuilding those regulators or they're fixing issues with those, if they know that you're going to be diving nitrox in them, they're going to put those Viton O-rings in that can handle the oxygen content. And so just going out down to AutoZone and buying a couple O-rings to throw in a regulator, besides the fact they may not be the right size, they could also be dangerous if you're diving nitrox. So what we want to do is make sure that our equipment is rated to handle that. So when we talk about nitrox, there's really not a lot of practical application, dive skills that we need to know. We don't have to go down and dive, we're not doing another mask drill. There's no drills to do when we dive nitrox, but there is a lot of education we need to do. And the first thing, equipment wise, is to make sure that our equipment is rated to handle that. The other thing is to make sure that the air that we're diving is correct. How would we know that the cylinder or the tank that we're diving has the right amount of oxygen in it? If you just grabbed a cylinder, here, I'll show you one. So this cylinder has a sticker on it that says nitrox, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our cylinders need to be marked to show nitrox. But how would we know that this has the right amount of oxygen in it, or what percentage of oxygen that has in it?
Boy, have stamped on it?
Well, it depends on what they filled it to, right? We talked about best blend. So
Yeah.
I told the dive shop I want a 39% nitrox mix. How do I know that they did that?
I don't know.
It's pretty important, right?
Yeah. Do they make affordable analyzers these days?
Yep.
Like decent analyzers?
Yeah, we're going to get into that here in a second. So I just wanted you to think about, do we just grab a tank that says nitrox and trust it?
I don't know. But where I'm at, I'm going to have to, because I don't have anything to tell.
So part of this class is the answer to that is no.
Mm-hmm.
To just grab a tank and trust somebody that, hey, we've talked about that oxygen toxicity. What if that nitrox tank is one of my decompression tanks and you grab it and it's got 90% oxygen in it?
Yeah,
that
could be catastrophic.
Could be a real problem for you, right?
Yeah.
You go down to 100 feet with 100% oxygen, you get oxygen toxicity fairly quick. That partial pressure is going to be way over what we want. So the first step is we're going to go to someone who's authorized to fill it. That means someone who has the properly cleaned oxygen, because they do make different grades of oxygen. You can go buy welding gas oxygen that may not be filtered for, I guess, particulate or rust in the tanks, things like that. So we want to go to someone who knows what they're doing and has the proper equipment and proper gas to fill it. So at the dive shop, we can fill nitrox tanks. They have the equipment. They get the oxygen from a reputable supplier to bring that in and fill the tanks for us. The next step is you should always analyze it yourself. Now at the dive shop, we have oxygen analyzers. We'll go over how to do that and show you some of the one of the analyzers that we use in a little bit. But that's the next step, is to analyze your own tanks. So if eventually you'll want to have your own equipment, you'll want to be able to take your own tanks usually. If you provide your own tank, a lot of these fill stations, or all the fill stations, should require that those tanks are O2 cleaned. And what that means is they've inspected the O-rings and the valves. They've made sure that there's no silicone grease that can cause issues before you take that tank out and get it filled with oxygen and then have a problem. So we want to, I guess we're taking our life into our hands, right? Ultimately, you're responsible for your own safety. And that's why you're taking the nitrox class. And that's why it's required, and why any reputable dive shop is not going to give you nitrox to go diving with if you don't have a nitrox cert, because they want to make sure that you know how to safely use this product. And then, so you want to flip back to the camera on me, Ben? Okay. So what they'll look for first is probably this sticker on the bottom. And I know it's hard to see. On the bottom, you can see tank and valve have been cleaned in accordance with O2 service. Yes. And so that's another different sticker that you're going to see on a tank, that it's been cleaned for oxygen. You're ready to go with that. You asked about an affordable analyzer. Oh, Ben's got nice slides there. I'm just going to make you look at. So when we mark a tank, we want to make sure we write down what percentage of oxygen. So here's one of the analyzers that I use. This is a Nuvair O2 Quick Stick. This is, I think, about $200 for an analyzer, and then about $60 to change the sensor every year. What do you think the best way to analyze a tank is? Whose directions would you take? Troy, what do you think?
Whose directions would you take?
Yeah, like how would you know how to use that analyzer?
I would take it to you guys and everything. Do it for if I knew how to use the analyzer myself, I could, and use it a few times, I could probably trust it. But I'd have somebody use it that knows what they're doing first.
Yeah, maybe look at the manufacturer.
Yeah.
See what their directions are. Have someone help you. So part of this class, we're going to analyze tanks. Now, obviously, we can't do that tonight because you're all at your own computer and can't be there to help. So part of this class is having you analyze a tank. So we're going to go through that procedure with a few of the different analyzers if we have them available. I've got a little video from the manufacturer of this one. Can I share my screen, Ben?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
With a lot of the analyzers, is it as vitally important to calibrate them as I would imagine it is? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So we're
it's a universal law that I kind of know about other things. You always have to calibrate your pieces of equipment, and I just was curious if that was also the case.
So let me see if I can share a screen here. Okay. Okay, so this is, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Hopefully you can hear it.
This short video covers the calibration and operation of the Navarre O2 Quick Stick. The O2 Quick Stick is a self-contained oxygen analyzer for nitrox divers. Air calibration is essential before every use. Calibrate where you will analyze your scuba tanks. Turn the O2 Quick Stick knob clockwise to turn the unit on and to adjust the calibration value up. Turning the knob counterclockwise adjusts the calibration value down and turns the unit off. Adjust the calibration knob until the display reads 20.9%, which is the percentage of oxygen in ambient air. To analyze a nitrox tank, open the cylinder valve slowly until a hiss can be heard and a gentle airflow from the tank valve can be detected. Hold the dome-shaped sensor end cap, which is the end opposite of the adjustment knob, against the valve opening, so that the nitrox mixture passes over the oxygen sensor. The dome-shaped end cover is designed to restrict gas flow to the sensor. Be careful not to block the exhaust ports on the side of the end cap. The reading should stabilize in 15 seconds or less. Record the oxygen level of the gas as required, and close the tank valve. Once the enriched air gas flow is stopped, the O2 Quick Stick digital reading will slowly revert to the ambient air oxygen content, which is typically 20.9%.
Okay. So kind of a quick and dirty video of how that works. It's going to keep trying to. Okay, so pretty simple. I mean, they're not really, it's not like we've got to have an engineering degree to be able to calibrate and use these. They're fairly simple. We can follow the manufacturer's recommendations, which is to calibrate it right before in the air that we're using it in. Check the tank by following following each manufacturer. Most of them are pretty similar, where we just allow a small amount of air to go through them, write down what we've got on it, and then write that on our tank. The other thing that we typically do is write the maximum operating depth on our tanks so that we know if there's an issue, how deep can I go on it? That's really useful for decompression tanks and things like that. Let me get back to so. Okay, so we've talked about, kind of go over what we've talked about. We've talked about how our delivery system is affected by oxygen, by the oxygen causes O-rings to fail if they're not the right O-rings. It can cause fire if we use the wrong lubricant, the silicone lubricant for some of the O-rings. We've talked about how we need to follow all the guidelines and procedures on how to analyze the tanks, that we don't just trust that the tank's got what we want in it. We personally analyze it for our safety. We've talked about how dive computers and the newer technology can help us understand and use the nitrox to get a better dive, a longer dive, also a safer dive. Do you have any questions about, I know it's kind of hard from just a little video to understand how to analyze a tank, but other than that, any questions about equipment and how that works with nitrox? Troy, you understand it pretty well?
Basics. I've definitely have to practice a few times and read the owner's manual, find exactly how to use it, practice a few times to get really familiar with it before I would really trust myself, using it.
Yeah. And that's why, that's really the only practical skill, I think, with this class, is to make sure that we go over that with you, that you can see how that analyzing works, and then be able to do it yourself so that you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Patrick, any questions? I think you.
No, I think I asked my one with the calibration. It
Mhm.
seems weird that they use that term though, because you're calibrating it to the O2 percentage in the air, right?
Mhm.
That's not
Oh, I think you
done it with
froze up
certain equipment. Oh, did I freeze up?
a little
Yeah,
bit.
I
Yeah.
saw it.
So that's what that manufacturer recommends.
Yeah.
Most of them will say use a cylinder of gas with a known oxygen content to calibrate
Okay.
them.
That
So
that
if
would
you've got, yeah,
it makes sense. It's just it's a little
yeah.
weird to me is all.
So if we've got a scuba cylinder with just normal compressed air in it, we could
Mhm.
actually take that and analyze it, and it will come up to about 21%, or we adjust
Right.
that to right around 20.9, 21%, and then analyze our nitrox tank. But once
Right.
again, you follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Some of them may have different procedures to do it.
Yeah,
So,
different instructions. Yeah.
yep.
Cool.
And
Yeah,
then,
other than that, I feel pretty
yeah.
clear.
Okay. Like I said, if you guys decide you want to do computer diving or any of those things, we can get you a class once you get those computers to make sure you understand that as well.
Yeah.
I know it's hard for me to just grab something off the shelf. I can go home and read about it, but it's always nice to have someone help me understand how that works, especially the transmitters and things if you get into that. So,
Yeah.
awesome.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. So a couple of things to kind of bring into this. So one of the things we deal with a lot is called Rule of 40. Most gear is designed to be able to use at the Rule of 40. What that means to you is that it will handle up to 40% nitrox if it's rated for nitrox inherently right out of the box. Now, there are a few regulators that are built to handle a little heavier than that with the and how they're built, but typically most gear is designed for Rule of 40, like our BCs, for example, or Rule of 40. Our most regulators are set to Rule of 40, so they're designed to handle up to 40% nitrox as well. So that's so it's not an accident that you guys are being certified to 40% nitrox, level 2 nitrox, because you're remaining with Rule of 40, that the large majority of what's going on and what you're using is able to be used with nitrox, with the what you're just been certified for. It'd be really weird to have certify you guys to 60% when the Rule of 40 is, and not be able to use a lot of gear and have you a lot more careful, because this is more of an entry level class. Other things to be aware of: oxygen has a huge impact on the world around us, right? Higher percentage of oxygens create oxidization and increase the amount of wear and tear on equipment that's not rated for it quite a bit. It's one of the reasons it's not a good idea to dive nitrox in a dry suit, unless you have supplemental air or supplemental something like argon for your dry suit. It causes a lot of wear and tear that doesn't need to be there. The other key thing to be aware of that we just want to make sure we're cognizant of is, with increased oxygen content, we have the increase a chance of fire and explosion. And fire definitely propagates with more oxygen, and a higher concentrate of oxygen creates bigger problems as well. So just a few things to be aware of as you go along. In terms of analyzing, Troy, you were talking a little bit about it, worried that you don't have an analyzer of your own, or kind of at the mercy. So no matter where you're going, if they use nitrox, there has to be an analyzer somewhere. Period. Right? Simple math. So,
Yeah.
for example, about a year ago, Nikki and I we went down to Florida. And for a hurricane, we could only find one boat about an hour south of us. We'd get on that was a recreational boat. And we went ahead and called ahead, and we couldn't order our nitrox. They would have said, just give us, just load us up with nitrox. And they're like, great, 36%, whatever. Right? We get to the boat, and they were loading up our tanks, and they were walking past us with our tanks. I said, wait, we need to analyze our nitrox bottles. And they said, and the guy looked at me like I was crazy. He says, I analyzed it. I says, fantastic. Thank you for doing that, but I need to analyze it as well. It's what I'm breathing. It's not what you're breathing. And he says, but I analyze it. I says, well, that's great. I still need to analyze and see the analyzation myself. And he says, I'm a retired firefighter. And I says, thank you for your service. I appreciate that. I need to analyze my tank. You don't trust me? He says, nothing for nothing, but I've known you for about 60 seconds at this point. So no, I need to analyze my tank. He says, but I did it. This is great. I need to do it. He says, but I'm a retired firefighter. Again, thank you for your service. Get your analyzer and let's get this analyzed. Okay. All right. He was fairly dismayed, but in the end, Troy, who's responsible for your dive? Troy, did you hear me?
You froze there. That last.
Sorry about it.
5 seconds.
Not a worry. So, Troy, in the end, who's responsible for your dive?
You are.
Absolutely. So, in my case, of this study, the firefighter, great. He's a retired firefighter and he analyzed it. He's not responsible for my dive. I am. I need to know what's in my tank. So, in the end, if you order nitrox and they bring you nitrox, they will have an analyzer somewhere. If they do not have an analyzer anywhere that you can use, you should not dive that tank. If you do not know what is in that tank, you cannot dive it. Patrick, if I have a bottle of 39% nitrox and I crack it open, I smell it, can I smell the difference in oxygen versus air?
Nope. And if you smell anything, you probably shouldn't dive that tank.
Exactly. So as you kind of go through this process, be aware. You've got to be able to see what's in your air, because good oxygen and nitrogen don't have a flavor. You cannot get strawberry flavored nitrox, and you shouldn't get strawberry flavored nitrox.
I want to invent that because that would be a lot nicer to.
Yeah, bubblegum flavored nitrox. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to put some of that smelling agent they put in propane.
Oh, you do not want to breathe my cabin. No.
You'd be getting real sick real quick.
Make it a sweet scent. Then you can make money.
Yeah.
There you go. So as Aaron talked about a little bit, we definitely want to make sure we're marking our tank. Always mark your tank. Now, I do a little bit more than most. Do not use a hanging tag like this. This is a really bad example from the slides. I will change this someday. What you want to do is take a piece of duct tape with a permanent marker, and at the top of the tank, you want to put what the nitrox blend is, what your maximum operating depth is, at what partial pressure, as well as when you did it and who did it. You need to sign or initial your tank with your own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That way you know it's your tank. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of deviation from what you're going to learn in the book. Not only do I do it at the neck of the tank, but I also do it in 2-inch letters on a big piece of duct tape on both sides of my tank on the bottom, just above the boot. Okay. So I have it on the top, on the front, on the back, and I do the bottom as well. This ensures that this little bitty tag that I've written up here at the top doesn't get mixed. And if somebody sees that I've got a bottle of 60% and I'm trying to breathe that at 99 feet, it's easy from a distance for other people to see. It just makes it that much safer. So make sure not only do you mark the top of the tank, mark the sides of the tank and the bottom of the tank as well. Don't be shy. Mm-hmm. And make sure that it's clear what's in that bottle. If you do not know what is in your bottle, do not breathe that tank. Easy enough?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, we went through a lot tonight. What did we learn, Patrick?
The importance of partial pressure of oxygen, how it affects your function in the water and at depth. Same with nitrogen, safe operating ranges, understanding narked or what getting narked is, the procedures for that, as well as some of the technical stuff and with the tanks, and
Good.
as well as tables and all of that.
Awesome. Troy, did you learn anything tonight?
Yeah, doesn't mean that you can go deeper. In fact, it's probably the opposite. But you can go longer, shallower depths. I probably always use that chart on SSI. I'm not as smart as Ben to do all my calculations for myself, but
it's pretty easy. The nice thing is when you get your own dive computer, it will have a dive planner in it as well. And you can push in the depth, the time, and the nitrox blend. It'll tell you how long you can dive as well and how deep. It'll give you all that information in your dive computer. So be aware of that as well. All right, guys. That's what I've got for you guys tonight. We went through a lot of different stuff. I'm always here, and this video will be on YouTube most likely tomorrow. And you can go back and review this. And I have probably 4 or 5 other nitrox videos on there as well. You're welcome to go back to our channel and Teach Me to Dive and go back and watch these again and again if you'd like. They're there for you. I put them up for you guys. I know the information. So easy enough. As you go through this process, there you go. Teach Me to Dive, YouTube for all this stuff as well. So simple enough. Now, just kind of a little housekeeping for you guys. What are the things we're going to do as we go to go diving next Saturday and Sunday? Day 1, you will have one tank that has air in it, and you'll have one tank that has nitrox in it. What I will do is I have a nitrox analyzer with me, and we will analyze that tank on day 2 together. Easy enough?
Yeah.
Yep.
So day 2, you'll get to dive nitrox. Won't be a huge amount of benefit at 28 feet, but you'll at least get to say that you dove nitrox. Now, I have been low on auction at the dive shop, but I've had people dive 23% nitrox, but it's still nitrox. And they still had to analyze it. And they still found out it was 23%. Any questions for me, guys?
No.
That class will be next Friday, correct?
I'm going to do nitrox again next Friday as well. And you're welcome to participate in that one as well. You guys are more than welcome to participate more than once on nitrox. But I'll have this class uploaded to YouTube probably tomorrow.
Okay.
So if you guys like, I would be happy to send you the recording link as well.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. If you don't have any more questions, then I'm going to sign off.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you.